I will have to take a little bit. This is going to be slightly long. Um, After a few years as a junior writer in advertising, I was a fine art graduate, and with some theoretical bookish knowledge in strategy and consumer research, I joined this incredibly idealistic company called Center of Gravity. This place was so idealistic that Bala, one of the co-founders, for my orientation, he had me watch the then more or less new documentary called An Inconvenient Truth and something called The Corporation. Um, I was confused, and the gravity of center of gravity didn't hit me until a couple of years later when I was deep in advertising and in a traditional big agency. Um, why? Because what happens there is you knock off a brief in record time and the metrics of likes and shares. They tell you that your communication worked and you win awards for it. But deep down, you wonder whether you actually created impact on ground. Every time this happened, I would be reminded time and again of Bala, of Vijay, of Jesse, and Rajesh Sahadevan, who had this culture that they had created where they would go so deep into their research and their understanding of the human inside the consumer, the truth inside the context, and the community that is in the market, that insight would just lay bare, threadbare. How? I think one of the reasons that was so is because there was an old joke back then, which was that if there was only one book on any subject, uh, Rajesh would have read all three of them. Today, I come a full circle to introduce this man who I and the entire Indian advertising fraternity deeply respect and admire. Rajesh Sahadevan, who leads Center of Gravity, the collective that has pioneered the idea of human centered strategy more than 15 years ago. Their philosophy draws deeply from simple human aspects like listening, storytelling, and deep conversations as much as it does from mythology, sociology, popular culture, psychology, and many, many others. It's the reason that they've had tremendous business success with some of the biggest brands across India and Southeast Asia. Today, he's going to talk to us about human centered thinking, the future of business and brands. Uh, Rajesh, all yours.
Thank you so much, Reshma, for that glowing introduction. Let's see if I can live up to it through the next 1 hour. And thanks to both Prakash and you for inviting me to be a part of this event. I've attended quite a few sessions, starting with the one by Rory, and some of them have been really spectacular in terms of the learning. I understand that the two broad areas, and of course they are interrelated themes when it comes to this conference, is to do with behavior science and the art of context. And since there have been so many heavyweights who have spoken so elaborately about behavior science, I'm going to rest a little bit on the art of context today and the value of it in solving any problem, be it business or otherwise, or social problems or whatever that be. What I will do over the next hour is actually to kind of go on a journey of how center of gravity came to the idea of human-centered thinking from the time it started a decade and a half back, and close with a story that is still under production and will be released sometime next month, which is a documentary film on the human side of luxury, based on a mythical brand out of the UK. And then we'll have some Q&A sessions, hopefully in the last 10-15 minutes. And I'll try and give, hopefully, as good as answers as we can, because I'm sure in the area of human-centered thinking, the area is so vast that whatever we give will still be half-baked, because that's still evolutionary in its understanding and learning. And that's true for anybody, including us. So that's the quick background before I start. Let me share screen, and Reshma, Aditya, in case there is any issue in sharing of screen, please do kind of keep me informed. Give me a minute. Share screen. Can you see the screen? Reshma, if you can give a heads up to me on whether you can see the screen clearly.
Yes, we can see the screen.
Okay. So here we go. Like I told, I'm going to tell you 3 or 4 stories. At the end of every story, I'll try and abstract some principle which I think we could have as takeaways from today's session, and then go into the Q&A. The first story is a story that was from the early days of center of gravity, maybe 2006, 7, thereabouts. And this is a story I love telling, primarily because I was a part of the story in a way that I was impacted by it. But more importantly, because among the various stories that helped COG engage with with the idea of human-centered thinking, the few of them, this is one critical foundational source story, if you can call it that. This happened in 2007. We were hired by one of the largest decor companies, maybe it's one among the largest global decor companies, to actually kind of work on a strategy to sell some luxury product in Kerala. And as part of that study, as is the wont, we kind of go and meet customers and architects and interior designers. So we're going through that ritual. And me and a colleague of mine, Dilip Shankar, we kind of land in Cochin, and we meet the sales officer who takes us around. And then at some point in the morning, we start to head towards Trivandrum. Now, this is a 4.5-hour drive from Cochin. And through the journey, the sales officer is setting us up to see something which is spectacular or different or bizarre or whatever you can call it, that, because he's trying to build this expectation of this house that we had to see, because it's something that we would otherwise never see. So fair enough, this entire journey through beautiful green Kerala, and for those of you who are not from India, it is an absolutely astoundingly magical place in the southern part of India. And we are kind of driving through from Cochin, which is in the central part of Kerala, down south towards Trivandrum, as this guy is talking to us about the spectacle that we had to see. In about 4.5 hours, we kind of hit Trivandrum, and we kind of come to a specific place within Trivandrum, hit a cul-de-sac, take a left, and in the middle of absolutely pristine green fields that all of Kerala is actually, without exception, it's absolutely a stunning place. In the middle of those green fields, you suddenly kind of find this absolutely shockingly explosive orange-colored home. And it's almost like a slap on your face the moment you see it. Because this is how Kerala looks, right? And the house is, while this is not the house, it looks something like this. And like I told, it was a slap on the face. And the first reaction that I had was, what the hell is this? And you're kind of shocked because, while I'm not from Kerala, I'm partially from Kerala, I speak Malayalam. But somehow you feel like you own the beauty of Kerala, right? You've got this mildly parochial, cultish behavior that all of us have. And I'm going through those emotions as well. So I'm thinking in my mind, what the hell? And we walk up to the gate. Dilip and I get out of the car, and we walk up to the gate, and this very gentle-looking guy comes to the gate, and he kind of receives us. We introduce ourselves to each other, and I tell him in Malayalam, the local language, interesting home, because you can't tell the truth, as that would be rude. You can't tell a lie, as that would show up on your face. And he responds to it saying, "Onna arachu nikkinam," which is, I want people to stop dead in their tracks. I really can't make sense of what he's telling, and I'm thinking in my mind, okay, whatever. And we walk into the house, and the house is absolutely the apex of opulence, right? It's a ground plus 1 storied building. It's absolutely lavish, and lavish in a very baroqueish kind of a sense. You walk into the house, you have this huge sofa sets, massively upholstered sets, and there are these massive curtains with gold lacings and the works, right? And slowly in my heart, a sense of aesthetic condescension is building. It's not like I have any great claim to aesthetics, but somehow we have this behavior, right? I think, okay, what the hell is this going on? And there seemed to be no apparent resonance between the human being who stayed in the house and the house itself. So this discord is actually starting to kind of build some condescension in my heart. He takes us through the house, he walks us to the kitchen, and in Kerala, there's the idea of the showroom kitchen, which is a kitchen which is just for show. Many homes have this. And you're looking at that because you never cook in that kitchen, right? And you cook in a kitchen which is behind, called the work kitchen. So anyhow, the condescension is now kind of slowly rising up in degrees, and we walk up to the first floor. He takes us to the bathroom. In the bathroom, there is a sauna or a jacuzzi, one of those things. And there's also a plastic bucket with a mug in it. and so on and so forth. So anyhow, we kind of go through this house. This entire house incidentally almost looked like a non-decrepit painter was sitting and painting, and he kind of jokingly remarks to me saying that if anybody in this part of town knew that I was painting a house with this kind of a color, like a slab of a color, I would not get any business in this part of town. Anyway, I laugh it off. We walked up the side of the balcony, the Lipundai, and we ask a question which in retrospect was the right question to ask. It is not a typical research question. We ask, the guy's name is Shaiju, and we ask him, so Shaiju, tell us something about your life. And for the next hour and a half, Shaiju tells us this beautiful story of how he, arguably in a more tolerant place, tolerant of socioeconomic differences, tolerant of community, tolerant of caste differences, which is quite strong in some parts of the country even today. How Shaiju, even in such a place like Kerala, actually goes through all those pressures during his growing up years. They're not well off as a family. The father is a constable in the police department, and so on. And he's not good in studies either. And at some point, as is true of a bulk of people who come from the state of Kerala, out of the 6 million odd households, bulk of them, for reasons of economic betterment, all kind of migrate to the Gulf. So at some point, his uncle comes and tells him, looks like you're not going to do much in studies either, and he's shipped off to the Gulf. And the next 6 years, he has a horror time. I mean, horror as in very trying working conditions. I'm sure he would have worked in some construction site, maybe as a waiter in a restaurant. He kind of does all kinds of jobs. And it's quite tough. In those days, there are no phones either. 6 years later, he comes back home for the first time. And the idea of homecoming is very powerful. It's for all of us, but for him, it's particularly powerful because the person who left Trivandrum many years back is not the same person who's returning. He comes out of the airport, and the first thing that he does is to look out for people, friends and family members who he can identify or recognize, or those who can recognize him, because he desperately wants to tell the story. It's the famous thing told by Maya Angelou, right? I mean, there's nothing more sad than a story that's not told. He goes through that emotion. And I'm sure a lot of our fathers and grandfathers, pretty much when they kind of moved from a village to the city and went back to the village for the first time, would have gone through a similar emotion. So for the next 2 weeks in Trivandrum, Shaiju goes meeting a whole lot of people, telling the story again and again of how he's doing in Dubai, the kind of life that he leads, the roads of Dubai, the 555 cigarette packet that he has in his hand, which he kind of displays proudly, and so on and so forth. And this is 2 weeks of intense emotional engagement about his beginnings of his success. 2 weeks later, he's back in Dubai, suffers through for some more time. But by the time it's 16 years, the guy has built a restaurant, or he's bought a restaurant or something like that. He's made a ton of money. He sells it, lands back in Kerala, demolishes his old house, of which he doesn't have necessarily very great memories, and builds a humongous ground plus one home, and of course paints it with an explosive color of orange. And at some point in time, he turns to me and Dilip and kind of casts his hand out in front of him and tells, look at all the land that I own, which you can see in the distance, the 3 or 4 cars that you can see parked there. All of this can just disappear in just one illness. Just on one fine morning, I have an illness and all of this can go away. But this is my time under the sun. We meet his father, an absolute gentleman again. He makes us tea. He tells some stories of himself. 2 hours later, my colleague and I kind of sit in the car. We hit the same cul-de-sac. And I look back at the house, and it looks beautiful. The condescension is gone. It was a very powerful moment for me at that point in time, because the power of a story to emotionally displace us and make us feel differently about something. I told this to you in 10 minutes, but essentially it was a 2-hour conversation, was a very powerful thing. And I'm sure we all go through these stories. But what struck us about the story was that this story had potentially every single vector of strategy development in it. In other words, if you kind of collected 50 stories or 100 stories during the course of a study, you could pretty much know who your customer is, of those customer sets, who your core customer is. You could know what their relationship with home is. Of course, in the case of Shaiju, you know what the relationship with home is from this quick example that I'm talking to you about. You could understand what his relationship with decor is. You could also understand what his relationship with color and therefore paint is, the category in question being paint or emulsions. You could understand how you could potentially be differentiated as a brand with this customer. You could also figure out what kind of products you would relate to, what kind of color tools, what kind of communication. So the magic of a 2-hour story to actually hold within its womb every single vector of strategy struck us as something really, really powerful. And a series of such stories that we went through during that period in time pretty much established the idea of human-centered thinking as a way of doing work. In the early days, it was looked up to as it warms the cockles of the heart. It's anecdotal. It makes us all feel gooey inside, but does it actually lead to business results? But having done this for about 15 odd years now, it works virtually in every single instance simply because it works. It touches you deep within. Now, how does this all relate to context? For years, the world of marketing and research and strategy have kind of sweated a lot of their brows on the idea of going into the product category and knowing every damn thing about the product category. But actually, the life script of Shaiju or the life journey of Shaiju is one of the most definitive ways, or the context of Shaiju's life is one of the most powerful, definitive ways, a window through which we can understand strategy. So, this idea of life script being a central context building foundational piece for strategy and research became a very powerful thought for us and kind of helped us through a whole lot of work we've done with dozens of categories across geographies from there on. The eventual ending to the story is not this, that a few years later, I was doing one such speaking session at a university in the US. And I came to chance upon something that Ettore Sotsas, arguably one of the finest designers of our time, apparently traveled to India very often during the 60s or the 70s. And he chanced upon this bizarrely colorful homes in a place called Tiruvannamalai, which is between Bangalore and Pondicherry in the southern part of the country. And he was so inspired by this absolutely beautifully colorful homes, not done by some interior designer or by some person with great creative skills. It's done by the household owner along with the local contractor. He was so inspired by it that it is said, and this is obviously from red data, it is said that the Valentine typewriter, a design marvel, that he designed for Olivetti, including the postmodern furniture that Ettore kind of designed, was in a great part influenced by these colorful homes of Tiruvannamalai. So the magic of respecting somebody, the magic of empathizing with that person, not treating that person as a customer, and going to the context of their life journeys is a powerful way by which we can do a lot of problem solving, both in business and in social spheres. So that's the first story. Now, the related story to this is so I just talked about life script or life journey as a context. The related story is that obviously one of the major contexts that we all look up to when you do problem solving in the business sense or in the social sense is mega trends. Of course, there are the demographic trends, there are the social trends, there's the cultural trends, the economic trends, the political trends, and so on. So these are large mega trends, right? And there are a lot of experts who work in this area, Faith Popcorn kind of people who do stunning work in this area. What happens when you meet people is that we always get a glimpse of how these mega trends at a human level affect them. It's good to read or know of these trends at a very global level. And of course, I'm not talking of really, really fringe trends, which are yet to kind of impact society at a large scale level, for example, blockchain in the recent past. But any trend which is reasonably mass or starting to get diffused, it finds its human impact or voice on human beings. And when you go and meet people, if you have a conversation with them that is life script based, or it is just based on a meandering method of engaging with them, not a very structured, I'm going to ask you 10 questions to understand what your issues are. If you just kind of dance along with them for a while, if you lose status and if you lose control, often we find a powerful human angle to the mega trends that affects their lives. Many years back, around the time the first story happened, we were doing work for a large agribusiness firm out of India. This story is set in the western part of India, and of course, it's a service strategy for a service center that they want to set up in rural India in the western part of the country. And we asked to do this, and fair enough, as part of the study, we decided to do deep dive ethnographic studies, which means that we stayed in villages for anywhere between 1.5 to 2 months or so at least. It was a beautiful time of learning how to drive a tractor and a truck and plowing with bullocks and so on. It was a magical period. Now, during that period, we came to understand how megatrends, which is the second part of the context, affect human beings at an emotional human level. And this is the story. That if you go into any part of the country, especially the part that we're talking to as well, you find that bulk of the people, and I'm saying bulk, not all of them, bulk of the people who work in the area of agriculture and farming are predominantly old. That's because migration has happened big time from agriculture. And when we talk of migration in the context of society, very often we think that people migrate from rural India to big cities like Bombay, Calcutta, Bangalore. And that's just one part of the migration. There are many shades and nuances to migration that you understand once you go and engage with the humanity of the people that you deal with. There's a migration of people who go to nearer cities, nearer district headquarters, nearer towns. That is one kind of migration. There's another nuance to migration where people migrate out of a profession, which is in this case farming, and start to kind of open small shops or do haulage in a tractor or something like that. There's another kind of migration where the more smarter person in the family or the more astute guy is sent away to do other kind of professions, and apparently the more less endowed guy or the less ambitious guy is asked to work in farming. So there are different nuances to migration that we pick up once you go here, all again relating to the context, and how this would affect the brand or the company in question is going to be fairly definitive, right? Along with migration, one of the things that affect all of rural India and especially farming and farming in particular is the idea of the lack of certainty, which is that if you are in farming, the prices of the product are uncertain, which is one of the biggest issues. The timing of the rain is uncertain. The quantum of the rain is uncertain. Whether the seed that they have bought germinates or not in a country like India is uncertain because of a lot of pure seeds that still do the rounds. The fertilizer availability in some cases is uncertain. The availability of labor is uncertain. So pretty much every single aspect when it comes to farming is uncertain. And any brand that actually kind of offers certainty as an option, the farmers kind of really look up to those things. Now, one story that really caught our attention as we're doing this work was the story of a person in a place called Rajkot, a few miles shy of Rajkot. The guy had 6 sons or 7 sons or something like that. I don't remember. It's been quite a while back now. He had, of course, he had some amount of land in which he used to do farming and agriculture. But what he did was he kind of put up a small pan ka dukan. It's a small cubby hole kind of a shop where you have this stuff that you put in. It's like a mild intoxicant that pretends to be a digestive in some cases, but essentially it's a betel leaf into which a little bit of tuna or the equivalent of lime or calcium carbonate paste is put in, and people kind of knock it off and they have a good time. So he sets up this pan ka dukan or a small cubbyhole shop in which he sells this, keeps his first son there, and as the son is taking care of the shop, he gets him married off and then sends him back to do farming. Then he gets his second son to sit in the same shop. And as he's taking care of the shop, he gets his second son also to get married, and then he pushes him back to farming. And he does it with the third son. And by the time he does that with the fourth son, some local newspaper has picked up the story. And the story is this, that if you're a farmer, especially a small farmer, which is a lot of our country, you're not going to get married because no father would ever want to give their daughters as a bride to a farmer simply because it's a mess of uncertainty, and it's pretty much where the old guys kind of stay and the young guys are all getting out of the profession. So in Gujarati, the local language, they say "kheti ma chokri nati," which is, if I kind of translate it into English, it sounds a little bit crude. It's also patriarchal, but essentially the story being that if you are a guy who's a farmer, the chances that you get somebody to marry, a woman to marry, are fairly slim, if not at all. So again, in this case, with the brand in question, we kind of eventually kind of figured out that it's not about a service center, right? You need to figure out what you want to do as a vision to address this issue of sustainability and certainty in agriculture. Maybe the solutions are not just something that you can handle. You need to kind of have a coalition of forces, including other companies and NGOs and public-private partnerships. So it's a far larger story than just addressing the issue of putting a service center in a couple of areas. So again, this is the story of how the mega trends, which is a powerful context, when seen through a human lens, actually makes it real and pushes solutions in a manner that actually impacts people far more definitely than if it dealt with mega trends as some trend report, global stuff, which we kind of find nice terms about, but you really don't feel the humanity of it. And that's the second story of context that I want to touch upon. Now, obviously, if there is a story of life script, like in the case of Shaiju, or a story of context that comes from megatrends, the third part of the puzzle, which is the brand in question or the social issue that you're trying to deal with, very often a brand or a company, there's a context to that brand as well, right? So every brand obviously operates in some product category, but there is a larger context in which the brand plays. There's the societal context that I touched upon. There's a geography from where the brand came, very important as part of understanding the context of a brand to solve the situation for that specific brand. So some brands, like the Japanese, do a brilliant job of using the spirituality of their culture or the philosophy of a culture and make that a part of the brand story, be it Muji or whichever it is, Uniqlo and so on and so forth. The Scandinavians do a brilliant job of it. So very often the geography from where a brand comes or is born is a very important part of the context. The history is a very important part of the context. The local culture is a very important part of the context. The source category, which is not the category in which the brand operates, but the source that it deals with. For example, paint is for the home. So the home is the source category. Jewelry is for adornment. So maybe beauty or identity is the source category. So all of these are contexts that the brand needs to kind of deeply look at before they start to do strategic problem solving or opportunity seeking, any which way. And the story that I want to talk about is something from UK. We chanced into this brand when you're doing some work for one of the tailors from a street called Savile Row, very close to Piccadilly. A large Indian conglomerate was planning to get one of the tailors, one of the Savile Row brands into India. And therefore, as part of that study, we kind of had done some work in both in Savile Row and the luxury brands surrounding Savile Row. And of course, Loro Piana by itself is an Italian brand. It is from this Italian place called Trivero, I think the same place from where Xenia comes. It's a brilliant world-class luxury brand. Now, Loro Piana, like if you go to any of the tailors of Savile Row, and there are 8 or 9 powerful tailors, they pretty much stitch up suits, bespoke suits for the who's who in the world. It doesn't matter, it may be Obama, it's the Beatles, it's Gregory Peck, it's Brian Lara, it's the who's who that street stitches bespoke suits for. Now the fabric, there are various fabrics that are used in the suit, but the gold standard fabric that all the tailors of Savile Row really look up to, aspire to, and some of them even lust after is this fabric called Loro Piana. Not just Savile Row, but if you even went to Brioni or Massimo Dutti, they all talk of Loro Piana. What's the story of Loro Piana? This is a company that obviously is deeply invested in fabrics. And of course, they make garments and other stuff as well. But the two star products of Loro Piana, or the star fabric products of Loro Piana, are the vicuña fabric and the baby cashmere fabric. And these two pretty much hold the magic of that brand deeply in their core. Now, in the Andean region, which is the countries of Peru, Bolivia, and Argentina, around the Andes mountain, there are these animals called the camelids. They are the same family of the alpacas or the llamas. They are like smaller versions of camels, very gentle animals. And because they are a part of that harsh landscape where there are extreme winters and the cold is unbearable, over the period of their evolution, the fleece they have is 12.5 microns. It is kind of developed to have those insulation properties that really, and not least it having deep insulation properties, it's beautiful to touch as well. So the vicuñas, which is this camelid, the one defining feature of this animal is that you can't shear it, which is you can't take the fleece of it in captivity. It has to have, every vicuña has that minimum needs to have about a hectare of geographical area to actually roam around and have fun. So it can give it can grow well and give its fleece in return. So for centuries, there is a practice that happens in these regions, especially in Peru, which is the Inca Empire, which used to be there at some point in time. They used to have these rituals, and one of the ritual was called chaku. Chaku is, I hope that's they pronounce it, but let's call it chaku. And the idea of Chakku means to trap. So what happens is the communities that hang around the Andes region, around these camlets, every 4 years there is this ritual where the communities come together on a specific day, a pious day, and they run down the mountains with this rope held across. Where as they run down the mountains, they start to corral all these camelids into an enclosure. So they push all these camelids into an enclosure, the vicuñas into the enclosure. The young ones are left off. The ones that are ready for shearing are made to gently lie down, and then the fleece or the underfleece is actually taken out. And because you can shear these animals, I think, once in 2 years, and totally in its lifetime, you can only shear it 5 times, and you get about 150 grams in every round of shearing. It's really, really precious stuff. You take that stuff, and I think in the olden days, this might have been given in a bag to the royalty because the royalty used to wear clothes made of this fabric. So this is that fabric. And Loro Piana, actually, the bulk of the fabric, some of the most magical fabric they put out as clothes, draws from the myth of the Vicuña and this Andean story, including the rituals of Chakku done by the Incas. So even today, Loro Piana actually kind of keeps that ritual alive because if the ritual is lost, the magic is lost, the myth is lost. And if that's lost, it's not a luxury brand anymore. And because it's so precious, these are pictures of the festival that happens even today. These are guys running down the mountain with a rope to corral the animals, and then it's fleeced. Of course, this Hercus goat, this is baby cashmere. It's just a representational picture. But what they've done now is to create a conservatory because from a few million vicuñas, many of them got poached and you have hardly a couple of lakhs or something like that. But they built a conservatory because Loro Piana knows that if you want, want to hold on to the myth of it being a luxury product, you really need to actually take care of this. And so they built this huge resort or a conservatory where they kind of take care of the animals in conjunction with the government and the local community. Again, if you notice this example, the context of history, of geography, of culture, of rituals, all of that is a very, very important part of the brand. It's not about the micron count of the fabric or the GSM count of the fabric. It's all of this that build the magic for people to feel strongly about that brand, and which is why the most expensive fabric kind of thing that this the brand to lust after. It's got some epithet like the fabric of the gods or something like that. What is used in Savile and Savile itself is a super luxury product, and bulk of this, a lot of fabric is used in the high-end stuff that these suits are made by these 7 or 8 tailors. And these are some of the tailors in Savile brilliant stuff. Like I told, they do it for the who's who in the world, going through a little bit of a tough time in the context of COVID and lockdown. But like I told, the Savile story itself, let me just keep a watch on the time. I got about 5 to 7 minutes left before we start the Q&A. But if you look at Savile itself, the idea of Savile can never be understood till actually you go into the history of Savile Charles II and the invention of the 3-piece suit as early as the 1600s. Beau Brummel, and there's a movie based on Beau Brummel, the guy who kind of created the cult of dandy and who brought the idea of everything starting from bathing to polishing his shoes with champagne to the idea of blues and understated elegance. It was he who brought the idea of men, sophisticated men dressing as it exists today. Starting from Charles II to Beau Brummel to the fact that the suit has been inspired by professions like the doctors, because the doctors were a part of Savile. So therefore, the cuff in Savile suits have buttons which you can open out. It's not just for the look of it, because doctors in the olden days used to roll up their cuffs and actually do the surgery. So that's how the buttons, the button cuffs or the surgeon's cuff are there in the Savile suits. Or the epaulets, which is the military was an important part of the early customers of the suits. So the structured British suits have the epaulets or this kind of this padding here, or the vents that you see, be it the single vent or the double vent. You see it because people used to need those vents actually in a suit to actually ride the horse and so on. So till you actually go into the context, the history, as far back as 300, 400 years, understand the details of it, you really can't build a brand or create a powerful strategy or solve a problem. And these are 3 levels at which context can be dealt with. The life script context that I talked about in the context of Sheiju, which is the first example. The mega trends being seen through a human lens, which is the societal context, the social cultural context, the political context, and so on. And the third one is the brand's context. And by that, I don't mean the immediate product category. I mean the history, the geography, the culture in which the brand sits, the superset category, which is like the home in the case of paint. till you don't have a powerful engagement with these categories, and that is true even of social change, and you've done some work in the area of hand wash, which are powerful cases which kind of run in a few countries around the world, till you don't have a powerful understanding of the life script or the context in which the problem is attempted to be solved, you really can't solve the problem. And therefore, a lot of our work is around context understanding. There is a film which is due next month, which is a documentary, because we got so kicked by the stories of Savile Row that we went back and shot a film, a 33-minute documentary on Savile Row, which we hope to launch sometime next month. But coming to part of the topic, which is, why is this the future? Why is human-centered thinking the future? And that's part of the topic, right? The idea of 10,000 hours is a big story, right, in our culture in the last decade or so. And of course, it is popularized by Malcolm Gladwell in the book Outlier. But the root of the 10,000 hour story goes back to a paper written by Herbert Simon and William Chase a few years ago, after they did some work with chess masters and grandmasters. And they found out that if you really have to be a grandmaster, of course, you need basic talent, but you need 10,000 hours of preparation. And the same work was then kind of done, a similar kind of work was done by John Hayes with classical composers. And they found out that you need to kind of do great compositions for 10 years before you become a genius composer. So we all bought into the story that 10,000 hours at minimum is what we require to kind of excel in something. That story is coming to pass a little bit. And the person who was one of the fundamental people who kind of questioned that story was a guy called David Epstein. David Epstein, the guy on the left, and Malcolm Gladwell, the guy on the right, he wrote a book recently, a year back, and of course this book has been 5 years in the making. The first part of this happened in a conversation that he had with Malcolm Gladwell 5 years back at MIT. He's written a book called Range, and in this he talks of two kinds of people. One is a Tiger Woods world, and the second is the Roger Federer world. The Tiger Woods world is where Tiger Woods kind of gets into golf. He's precocious right at the age of 2. He's able to kind of have a good swing. He's just ready by the time he's 10, 14, 15. He's ready for the big game. Roger Federer, on the other hand, was doing all kinds of things till he was that age. He was playing all kinds of sports, everything except tennis, in fact. He was into skateboarding, he was into basketball, into badminton, you name it, 12, 13 different kinds of sports. In fact, his mother wouldn't even give him a tennis racket because he wouldn't return his serves properly, or so David Epstein states. And the point that David Epstein comes to is this, that the norm of success in the world is Roger Federer. It's not Tiger Woods, which is that people who kind of have this varied approach to a profession, which comes from engaging with many things, almost like an unstructured way, and then start to hone in a profession, are far, far more powerful and is far more the norm than the myth of the Tiger Woods kind of world. Whereas, that the myth of Tiger Woods, I can understand why people relate deeply to it, because we all like the precocious child who can play a violin at the age of 3, and we can relate to it because it gives a sense of drama, there's a sense of visibility to it. Whereas the Roger Federer world is pretty ambiguous, right? You don't know what the hell you're doing. You're doing something for 10, 15 years and then hope to God that one day you turn out to be brilliant at your work. Now it turns out that this multi-potential based approach to any field, and it's been proven in the case of athletics, but it's true of many other fields as well, is a very powerful way to be successful. The reason I'm telling that is that, and the best part of this entire story is that Gladwell and David Epstein meet again in MIT in 2019 March. And Epstein, towards the end of the conversation, asks Gladwell, do you still believe in the 10,000 hour story? And so graciously, Gladwell tells, no, obviously 10,000 hours are important. You need to practice a lot. But I conflated the 10,000 hour story with specialization. That's not necessarily right. So the idea of 10,000 hours is not about specialization. If you kind of cut across many disciplines, many interests, and then you start to hone on something, your work is far more powerful, simply because of this distinction, which is that there are kind learning environments and there are wicked learning environments. The kind learning environments are environments like, say, for example, chess or swimming or golf, where things don't change a little too much. There are certain patterns, there's a certain repetitiveness, and so on and so forth. The wicked learning environments are businesses, war, some kinds of sports. So the more you go into a wicked learning environment, which is completely ambiguous and almost anything can happen at any point in time, the need for this multi-dimensional approach is going to be important, which means that we are coming to a future where the role of a polymath or a generalist is going to be far, far more important than somebody who's super specialized, at least at leadership levels. And all the elite players, especially in any field, require a polymath approach. And that's one of the reasons why this approach of context, which requires a large span of engagement and exposure, is going to be an important part of all work going forward, especially as the world keeps going back to the romanticization of specialization. Not to mention this, the last part of this discussion is that the reason why human-centered thinking is going to be critical is that we are at a time in our lives where a whole lot of brands have subordinated or let gone of relationship with their customers, of owning the customer relationship, owning the customer engagement, and it's all gone to the big boys, the Facebooks and the Googles and so on and so forth. So pretty much the understanding that you have of the customer is the understanding that they give you. And very often you may be paying for that understanding far more than what you want to. The idea of these walled gardens, which is these large platforms controlling customer data, controlling customer understanding, the relationships, the engagement. And these gatekeepers are the way through which you'll reach a customers is going to be a tricky reality going forward. And therefore, what will happen as an outcome of that is that you're going to be completely emotionally divorced from the world of customers. And that's going to be serious stuff going forward. So it's become all the more important for brands to engage in human-centered thinking, relate deeply to customers through the various contexts that I just talked about, because all complex solutions come from the nuanced understanding. And this is not to the exclusion of the importance of technology or data. We use all of it in our work. In fact, we're amongst the first off the block to get into the world of blockchain and spend a lot of time understanding that. But that doesn't come in place of human-centered thinking. That's all I have to kind of throw at you for the time being. I don't know how much time we have. Maybe about 10 to 15 minutes for Q&As. And if time permits and there are no Q&As, which will be pretty sad, and you see, I can go through one more story. How does it matter?
Can't make us choose, Rajesh. That's terrible.
All right.
Though I have to add, I honestly don't remember any instance where you had a story to tell, and there were questions after that. I don't really remember ever there being an instance where there were questions at you, because it is your storytelling that just draws anyone in and then takes you to exactly the coordinates of your thinking. So there are some things to discuss, but there are some things that we like to ask. I'm sorry, but let me ask just one or two questions, and then I think we have some time. If you can tell us those stories, it would be great. I'm willing to. If you think that you can tell us this story quickly, then please do tell us, and then we'll start Q&A from there.
Yeah, this is actually not related to context, Reshma, but I think I just felt like it's an important story to tell in the context of today's times, right, where there are really no discussions and conversations happening. There's a massive amount of polarity happening. Everything's pushed to the extremes. The idea of listening to the other point of view and coming to an appreciation or a nuanced appreciation of something has come to pass. And I'm sure I am a victim of that as well in many ways. We are all victims of that, because we take positions and then we just, it kind of upsets us. The other position upsets us because it tickles us in some way. Recently, we are doing some work it was a CSR project for a brand based out of, for a company based out of Gujarat, and this is in a place called Kutch. In the Kutch, there are the bunny grasslands. It's a massive, I don't know, few hundred or few thousand square kilometers of grasslands. It's got 43 different kinds of grass. And for years, pastoral nomads from around the western part of going from Persia and Afghanistan, Iran, they used to kind of come down, including Pakistan. They used to come down to Kutch because it is rich with fodder, 43 different kinds of grass, like I mentioned. And that's the legend that goes. Now, we're doing some work and we happen to meet some of these communities who come from these bunny grasslands. And they're all pastoral nomads. And one of the communities, and let me see if I can fish out. Give me a minute. Let me see if I can fish out. Yeah, there you go. One of the communities, of the 10 or 12 communities, the communities have got all kinds of names, right? Powerful names, Rabaris and Ahir and Mutwas and Haleputras and so on. And one of the communities that are part of this landscape are the Jats. And there are many types of Jats. There are the Jat Garasias, the Jat Fakiras, and these are embroideries done by these people. The Jats have a principle, and I'm sure it's true of many other communities as well. They've got a principle called the Abat. All of Bunny grasslands actually work off the idea of collective commons, right? The grasslands belongs to cows, not to the people. The cows own the grasslands, or the buffalo owns the grasslands, right? It's such a powerful thought. Now, from the idea of collective commons, what we came to know is a beautiful story of what is called as Abat. Abat is collective action, which is that in the Bunny grasslands, among these communities, if somebody wants to build a well, he has to requisition the help of his village or his community. Now, there's a day fixed and they come and dig up the well. But the rule of this Abat is that you have to go first and request the help of somebody in the community with whom you had a scrap or who's hostile to you. That's critical. Without that, you can't go ahead. So the entire village will be waiting when you actually go and tell this person, I'm sorry for what has happened. Can you please come and help build the well? And the guy, very often, if it's really pissed off, he'll get lost. The second stage of getting that person to agree is, once you're done whatever you can, is to send the oldest person in your family, the buzurg, or the respected old person, a 90-year-old maybe, to go and request that person to come and help build the well. Now, if the hostility is too much, maybe the guy would refuse, even the old man. The third stage of that is to kind of choose the youngest daughter in your house and send the youngest daughter to request that guy to come and help you build the well. And by this 3-stage process, very often 9.5 or 9.9 times out of 10 times, the guy will let go of his animosity and he'll come and help build the well, which is the act of going from redemption, which is you going and asking him for help, to respect, which is you asking the eldest person in your family to go and ask for help, to affection and love, which is the youngest daughter in the. How do you even think of a socio-cultural way of dealing with conflicts in this manner? And it kind of, if you're a herder and you lost your entire herd due to some disease, you can go and pick one buffalo from each of the families in the village and you can start life. And once you kind of built your herd to the size that you wanted, you will give the herd back to them. If you lose one of your bullocks in the bunny, anybody who finds the bullock or the cow is supposed to take care of it till the owner comes, take care of it well, and the money that is earned from taking care of the cow or the bull is deposited into the local temple or the mosque in this case, and then given back to the person who then comes and reclaims his cow. Brilliant stories of managing conflict, and there are so many of them actually. And it's remarkable that when you go and meet these people, they actually kind of show a mirror to how the world has to behave and engage. But these stories never really come out because we are stuck between the news channels and the interlocutors who go from place to place and the bullshit that comes out later on in the press and so on and so forth. But it is powerful. And like I told, the idea of context is something that is central to all of our work right up front. Yeah.
That is such a beautiful story. That is so inspiring, and this is something that I pardon that I'm making that shift from something so human to something that we wish could be a little more human, which are brands. And something that I do want to ask you. We are living in the era of building brands on a very quarter-to-quarter basis. The metrics are very different from what we're hoping that they would be. They are more based on its clicks, its likes, its shares, its comments, its responses, which can also be bought. But this is the way that a lot of branding is happening today. And in this era of this quarter-to-quarter brand building and quick marketing, very pointed targeting, what is your point of view on it?
So the question is, are you playing the commodity game or are you playing the brand game? That's what it comes down to, because eventually brands are chosen because people resonate deeply with them and they are willing to pay back with loyalty, premiums, and preference, or all the three very often. And the idea of being short-termist about this comes at a cost. And I'm sure there are companies willing to bear that cost, and there are companies not willing to bear the cost. However, if you stand up for the world of human-centered thinking, in our experience, no client, and we have kind of done 200, 250 odd projects across 40, 50 categories. No client has ever pushed us to do things ahead of time. There is a magic in doing things, of course, agile enough, but still at a certain pace, because these things are not like fast food. You can't cook these things in a week and give it to a client. It takes a certain time and maturity and kind of cross fertilization to actually come out with the right solution. But clients are okay with it. I mean, this is a story that's been sold, like the 10,000 story. It's a story that's been sold that if you don't do something in 1 week, I don't work with you. Okay, get lost. We don't want to work with you. Who cares? I don't care. And COG doesn't care for sure, and I'm telling it upfront on this. Who cares? You want a fast food, go to a company that sells you fast food, right? We are not fast food. And that's not how brands get built. That's not how relationship gets built. If you're talking about relationship, the entire idea of human-centered thinking comes from human beings, right? Can relationships be built overnight? If you can't agree to that premise, then how can you agree to the premise that brands can be built overnight? So this entire nonsense of performance marketing and all the stuff that goes around, good for them, yeah. I'm sure there's a place and value to it. I'm not even kind of looking down upon that at all. There's a deep value and place to it. But if you are wanting to build deep relationships, which is what all of brand strategy is about, which is to have a deep, enriching relationship that goes on forever with your customer, which then translates into loyalty, premiums, and preference, it takes a certain maturation, which is why luxury brands last out 200 years, which is why universities last out 200 years. It's not a PE, VC run brand which kind of comes and disappears. That's basically turning money around. You can't call it as brand building. But if you are there in this, and social issues are far more complicated, right? You need to have a human view. You can't solve a social problem in a week or a month, let alone a few years. You're going to take a decadal perspective on social issues. So I'm sure those pressures are there, Reshma, but it really doesn't matter, right? It's the world that you stand up for. And all this drama of we need to get ready, get off the ground in 1 month, QS. I mean, it's left to you. It's left to the leadership to convince their team, to convince even the shareholders, saying that if you want to make money in the long run, and goodness is good business, let's spend a little bit of time and play the long game. I mean, that's what we stand up for. I'm sure there are exceptions to the rule, and I'm not deriding them in any way, but this is the world that we stand up for.
Understood, taken. Which brings me to another part, which is something that you were also talking about, the fact that we're living in the world today, which is filled with our with very strong opinions. And I think what I'm also coming to, in the little time that we have, I'll try to make my point as fast as I can. But the fact that at one point in time, communication, at least for brands, was one way. You made a fantastic ad. A woman jumped into a cricket field and she danced, and because she was absolutely happy, she was happy, and all of India cheered with her. Because she was so happy, and she bit into that bar of chocolate, and it was fantastic, right? And that worked. You couldn't say anything back. But today you're living in a world where it is a two-way communication, and when you're having that conversation with a brand, you realize that you can have a conversation only with someone who is a human like you.
Yeah.
And you will only be interested in having a communication with that person if he is a person or if she is a person. But while this is one end of it, another end of it is also the fact that today we're only willing to also have, not only do you have to be a person, you also have to be a person who has an opinion. It doesn't matter if your opinion is opposite to mine, because it just gives me an opportunity to then voice my opinion stronger.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean that today brands have to have those strong opinions, even if, because brands generally try to play it safe. Considering that opinions are such an important part of how we judge whether we want to engage with someone, do brands need to have that opinion?
See, I mean, there are two things that came to mind as you're kind of asking the question. I mean, one of the stories that people tell when it comes to defining a brand is that a brand is the ownership of a point of view of the world. And to have the point of view is very important. And of course, many large brands, for reasons of stability, for reasons of diplomacy, for reasons of kind of being attractive to a large heterogeneous base, may not necessarily take positions. Nevertheless, it's important to have a position. The second part of it is that the importance of having a bi-directional conversation, which is what then creates engagement in relationship. larger brands, and not all brands, but quite a few large brands struggle to have this. It's a smaller Instagram-driven brands, be it stories by Joseph Radek or even Audi Venkatesh, who kind of gives brilliant stuff on photography and on how to do photography. Though they are the people who have regular conversations with their customers, and I think you're going to be seeing a future where brands have to be human, brands have to engage, they have to relate to people, they have to have bi-directional conversation, they have to co-create, and all of this has to happen not just face-to-face in a human-centered way, but even technologically through platforms. So the things like AI would come in handy there, vis-a-vis this performance-driven marketing kind of stuff where it's kind of heavily oriented towards, and the chatbots are telling random stuff which you can't make sense of, and so on. In due course of time, to address the issue of the walled gardens that I just talked about, which is the big boys are gatekeepers to understanding our customers, that should give way to brands actually having bidirectional engagement with their customers on their platforms or channels through a period of time, and that relationship is going to be key, and technology is going to play an important part. And Center of Gravity, and we ourselves are developing some product around that, an AI-based product around that, which should be up in a couple of months' time. But again, like I told, this is beautiful, right? To have the best of technology and the best of human-centeredness come together, and we are having fun because I mean, what better than to try and go on a journey of being a polymath? I mean, we kind of go through Joseph Campbell and Maureen Murdoch and James Marcia and his work on adolescent identity, and stand-up comedy through George Carlin and Kutch and handicrafts and so on. On the other side, we are trying to engage with blockchain and artificial intelligence. And this coming together is going to be very key going forward. And that's the magic of this work when done well. And that's why we love it, actually. I think we are almost closing in the time. Can't hear. You're on mute, Reshma.
I was just saying, yes. I mean, it's not just an organization, but it's a mind itself. As a mind, it's beautiful. Thank you so much, Rajesh, for coming on to NowFest. We are just so thrilled that you've come. You've told us these beautiful stories, and it means a lot that you're here. I have not let Prakash say a word. I am so sorry.
Well, here's what I'm going to say. A big shout out to Anusha, Nandita, Pallavi Jain, Jhalak, Pavitra, Naveen, Srishti, Jesse, and Pallavi. I'm sorry we were not able to take all your questions. But just what we'll do, we'll ping out Rajesh's LinkedIn ID out there, and then maybe you can connect with him and drop him a note. And he's supremely busy, but you never know. And we will find out ways to get answers for you. Thank you so much for that.
And kudos to both of you and to your entire team, because initially when you spoke to me, Prakash, I was wondering how you're going to pull this thing off across time zones and 35, 40 speakers. And I'm sure this is the first time you're doing this, but it's a spectacular thing to pull off. So my congratulations to you guys.
Lucky, some 61 speakers, 21 countries. And I think everywhere except Antarctica and the International Space Station is what we say. But I think it's people like you, and our fantastic panelists who are right now waiting, amazing people from different corners of the world. And they just said, you know what, we are doing this together. So it's people like you who are phenomenal with their knowledge and very generous with their time and, with the gift you guys are giving us. Thank you so much.
Congratulations to both of you.
Everyone from all over the world. We thank you, Rajesh.
Thanks. Bye.